welcome to this webinar where we'll be covering another persona in our CXO series. And today it will be a Chief Financial Officer. You can follow the series through our newsletters if you go to inspire.co and sign up to the newsletters, or you can access all the recordings and the extended recordings through the platform. If you just log into your membership, you have any questions looking around, just contact us on customer support at inspir'em.coach. Thank you. So today I'd like to welcome Steve Mitchell, Chief Financial Officer from Redgate. Steve, would you like to do a bit of an intro and background on yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Morning, Jen. Morning, everybody. Good to be talking to you. So yeah, I'm Steve Mitchell. I'm the CFO at Redgate Software, and we're a B2B software business in the database space, and we're about 600 people, so a sort of mid-sized business. But my background, I started out and trained as an accountant way back in the late 90s in a large accountancy practice, and then I moved into telecoms, and I spent about 15 years working in telecoms across a number of sort of management and leadership roles, and that included being chief of staff to the CEO in a business, working in marketing, working in a commercial team, so going out alongside salespeople, negotiating with customers and setting sales commission schemes and so on. And eventually I became a CFO in a telecoms company over in Ireland. And since then I've mainly been in CFO roles, but I've moved to slightly smaller businesses like the one I'm in now, where I enjoy the kind of pace and dynamism in a slightly smaller business. So I guess the reason for flagging some of that is CFOs will have quite different backgrounds. So quite a few CFOs will have a very linear path, and they've only ever worked in the finance function. And that might mean they think about how a business spends money and what a business is trying to do in a slightly different way to others like me who've been out and worked in marketing and sales and commercial roles.
Thanks, Stephen. That's interesting, that the background between the commercial roles, and yeah, because often when we start out in sales, we tend to think, we pigeonhole CFOs, and we tend to think of them as being very financial only and very accountant only, whereas actually your background shows that that's part of a sales role. We need to do our research and understand the backgrounds of our CEO and what might, or CFOs, what might be on their agendas, and all the C-suite actually. Can you talk us through perhaps the biggest challenge you have to deal with as a CFO?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are quite a few, and there's a lot of context switching in the role, because you're across quite a few things, and you're sat on the board of the company usually as the CFO, which means you can't just think about finance and your own function. You've got to be thinking about the broader business. But I think if I think back to what have been the toughest things, they've usually been people related. So a couple of times, and thankfully this hasn't applied in the business I've in, but I've been in a couple of businesses where I've arrived as part of a management team trying to turn around a struggling business, and often that means reductions in the number of people in the business. So you're making some really tough decisions about people, and sort of relating that to what many of you might be trying to say, sell me and my business. When you're going through those tough times on the people front, it obviously makes you really conscious of every penny you spend on other things. So I can think of an example of when I was just before the last role I had before I became a CFO, the CFO that I worked for, and this was a 5,000 person business with 1.5 billion euros of revenue. He introduced a process where he signed off every purchase order, everything. If it was €1, he signed it off. And he set a meeting. He came into the office at 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And if you wanted any money signed off, you came in the office and you had to sit and present it to him, and you had to get in between 7 and 8 to do that. So that's quite an extreme example, but it shows how focused sometimes you have to get to sort of change the spend culture in the business, and to make sure that people really do believe that they need that spend.
Oh, that sounds quite painful. And actually, it's part of what we teach all our sellers and sales leaders is to understand what's involved with getting financial approval and getting paperwork signed off. And we often say, actually, it's rare that it goes so high in an organization. Normally, it's more dealt with by a kind of an operating committee or a kind of executive team, not necessarily right up to the board. That's quite a challenge for sellers to get things signed off at that level.
That was quite an extreme example, and I can tell you I wasn't too happy when he went on holiday for 2 weeks and asked me to cover for him in those 7 a.m. sessions. But it's not normally quite that extreme, everybody.
It's not normal, but it also plays to the point again. We try and encourage people to understand the dynamics of an organization. So whether they're in a growth phase or a turnaround phase or contraction phase, because those different phases or stages a company's going through will impact how decisions are made and how things get signed off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just to help our team understand a bit more about the kind of the role of a CFO and how the organization works in a financial team, could you explain a bit about who the key people are, the key roles that report into you, and what sort of KPIs you're tracking and you're managing the team to, please?
Yeah, sure. So the most obvious sort of direct report I have is the finance director, and he's tasked with making sure that we've got the right systems and processes in place to be accounting for everything correctly, to be able to report, running all of the sort of core finance activities like accounting, tax, running payroll, collecting cash from customers and paying suppliers. So those sort of transactional finance things. But also he's tasked and his team are tasked with delivering insight into how the business is performing. And that includes where we're spending our money and whether that spend is effective or not. So he and his team are very interested in business cases for spend, and especially if it's new spend. And they're obviously involved in setting our budgets as well and setting what we can afford. So they've got a lot of interest in what we're spending. They're probably a bit less likely to be involved directly in who we spend it with and which supplier we choose. I have a strategy lead reporting to me, and the role there is really helping us lift our eye line and think about where we want to be in 3 or 5 years' time. Most of us in our jobs, we're thinking about what we're doing today, tomorrow, next week, next month. The role of that team is to help us lift our eye line and think a little bit more long term. So to an extent, steers the type of things we spend money on, but again, not really what supplier we use. I guess a bit more probably directly relevant to you all as sellers. Our general counsel or head of the legal team reports to me, and while they've got bits of their role ensuring we're complying with laws and regulations, and they do different corporate things, the bulk of what they do is supporting our commercial teams in terms of how we're dealing with customers and contracts we're signing there, but also what we're buying. So they're a key stakeholder. The legal team for you as sellers are a key stakeholder, and those teams can vary a lot in approach. So having seen what I've seen elsewhere, when I was recruiting our general counsel, I was trying to find someone whose approach is, I want to help the business move forward and make good decisions, and to do that safely and within the law, rather than someone who thinks we need to comply with every regulation, and if I can, I'll try and help the business as well. So that can be really different. And I would say as well, legal teams can be used as an excuse. So if someone wants to buy some time, it's very, very easy to say, it's with legal. So I would definitely say kind of probe on things when you hear that, or if you say it's waiting on the CFO. Yeah, I would say probe on those things to make sure it actually is. I guess in our business, we don't yet have a dedicated procurement function, but that's probably the other really relevant thing that most CFOs, if there's a procurement function, it's likely to report to them. And I think the key thing with procurement, again, it varies from place to place, but the way I view it is they're not just there to get the best price. They're there to get good value, and price is a big part of that, but also what level of support and service we're getting, the quality of the product, and whether we're trying to build a long-term partnership with suppliers, and we can feel confident then that a supplier is going to invest in us and our needs as a business. And that's an important thing to try and make sure that you make sure you deliver, alongside obviously that there'll be a price and terms and conditions negotiation.
Thanks, Steve. There's a few things in there I wouldn't mind picking up and drilling down a bit more on. You talk a bit about the business case and looking at what comes up towards a business case. What sort of things, we talk a bit about the financial side of a business case, but what are the other things you look for in a business case? Because it's not necessarily just the spreadsheet numbers, but what else are you looking for in that business case to get it to float up to hit both that strategy requirement, the long-term requirement, but also the needs from the legal team and the needs purely from a return perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is, is it going to enable the business to grow? Because again, while there is a big sort of cost control and finance element to a CFO's role, for me and the senior people in my team, we're here and we're incentivized to help build a great business and to support the other parts of the business in making great decisions to grow our business. So ultimately, we want to have that growth mindset. So we'll be thinking about, is what we're buying really enabling our business to grow? Is it going to help us differentiate? If we're signing up to something long term, we'll be checking, does that supplier have a reasonable history and decent kind of financial backing, so that we can feel confident we're not, signing a 5-year contract with someone who might not be around in 6 months. And I think certainly I mentally put spend into different categories when someone's proposing it, and the easiest one for you to get me to sign off is, hey Steve, we spend £100,000 with supplier X now, supplier Y can give us something a bit better and it's £80,000. I mean, that's kind of it's a no-brainer category. If it sounds sensible, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about that. The more nuanced cases then are when, it's a good, it's something that should make the business better, and hey, it's going to save us money, but no one's actually committing to where that saving will come from. Then it takes a bit more thought and a bit more stress testing. And then sometimes, obviously, it's new spend, it's extra spend. It's not about saving money. It's about really enabling the growth of the business. And they're the things, that's the bucket you really want to believe in. But it's also the bucket that's least certain. So again, that's the one that's likely to face the most challenge. But it's the stuff that we really want to sign off because we want to grow our business.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because again, often sales teams are trained and think about this, the first case you talked about. So if it's, I can do the same or better, marginally better for a lower price, we tend to think of the CFO and the whole finance function of being very cost driven and always trying to look for the business case being about reduced cost. But actually, when you talk about the more nuance and the growth opportunities, because of course you're tasked with growing the business as well, as you're saying, so actually finding those business cases that help for growth and enable change, often harder for a salesperson to do, but perhaps more rewarding.
Yeah, that's it. And it's the more interesting discussion for us to have as well. So, at the one extreme, if we're looking at our electricity prices, it's so generic that it's just what's the cheapest one. At the other extreme, if we're looking at a new CRM system or something like that, where there might be a cheaper one, but actually the more expensive one is going to provide better insight, enable us to do a much better job for our customers and serve them better, and therefore hopefully grow our business over time. Then that's the more interesting discussion about how much extra do you invest to really get and enable that growth, and are we as a business set up to actually use that tool and get the most out of it.
Thanks, Steve. The other thing we talk about a lot in our courses and in our newsletters and blogs is about encouraging our sellers and ourselves to stay ahead of industry trends and to learn what's going on in the marketplace so that we can add value to our prospects and our customers. How do you stay ahead of industry trends? So where do you get your information? Where do you get, because there's so much changing at the moment, particularly in technology. How do you educate you and your team? Where do the inputs come from that keep you ahead of the market?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm probably a little bit more haphazard about it than I often intend to be, but some of it is attending conferences. I don't do too much of that, but there's an industry conference next week in the US that I'm heading out to, and that's a chance to see what's going on in our space, but also for me that'll actually be a chance for me to interact with some of our customers and potential customers as well, to again be thinking about what is it that they need and getting my understanding up about what they need to drive their businesses, and therefore what it makes sense for us to invest in. I keep in touch with sort of peers outside of my organisation, and a lot of the time, sort of ex-colleagues that I trust, so that when I speak to them, I know I'm going to get an honest assessment of what they're seeing in their business. But also, it comes with the benefit that they know me and they know a bit of my history and what I know and don't know. So they've got just that more informed, I guess, view of what's going to be useful to discuss. And beyond that, I listen to podcasts, usually sort of business and politics podcasts, thinking about the broader landscape of things that might impact our business and our sector. And sometimes I'll read business books, but I tend to dip in and out of those. It feels a bit heavy going sometimes to plow through a 300-page book on financial decision making or what's happening in the IT space.
Thank you, Steve. There's questions come up, and we get it all the time, actually. And I think back to when I was a young seller and thinking about it. How do you get into somebody's diary, and how do you get into a senior executive's diary? How do you make that break as a salesperson in? Do you have any tips and tricks about, or even a story about how a vendor in the past as salespersons got into your diary, how they did it, and what sorts of messages that they sent to you or whatever that was in that initial introduction that made you think, actually, do you know what, it's worth spending a bit of time with this person? Because that's something our sellers all want to know.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I mean, it's an obvious thing, but it's always easiest if it's recommended by a trusted source. So whether it's someone in the business that is your sort of champion, as it were, in our business, but also, again, referring back to the sort of friends and ex-colleagues from outside the business whose opinion I trust. That's often the first place I'll go if we need something that's new for our business and we don't necessarily have any internal experience around it, or even if we have a little bit, I'll often go to those sort of external trusted sources. And often, as CFO, you'll often be pulled into the buying process quite late on. So getting in the door, you need your champion on in our business to be well briefed. If it feels like they need support building their business case, help them build it. Again, like the legal team, we can be used as an excuse. So if you can't get, if you've been told the next stage is you need to meet a meeting that's going to include the CFO, but it's 6 weeks passes, it probably means either it's not a priority or maybe the CFO doesn't have full faith in the person trying to set up the meeting. If someone I regard really highly comes to me and says this is an important thing, I'm not going to make them wait 6 or 8 weeks for a meeting. So kind of managing, and again, I'm sure it's what you're all sort of taught and briefed to do, but kind of getting up to speed on those stakeholders is key. And I think I would say, when things have worked before, a cold approach can work. If it feels like there's a genuine level of effort gone in to understand my business and its challenge, and maybe if the timing is right, and I know there are various tools out there that can give you a bit of insight into they've been looking at CRM systems or whatever it is, and try and get the timing right. But a general kind of inbound email or LinkedIn saying, hey, let me help you with your foreign exchange services, which I probably get 12 of a week. I don't look at any of those. So a few people have succeeded with a bit of persistence and a bit of effort. And the last thing I would say is I do believe like exec sponsors can play a role. It's a little bit gimmicky in some ways, I suppose, because that exec probably isn't bringing a lot of detailed knowledge, but I think I've seen it work and been an exec sponsor in a previous business as well, where it helps sometimes to have someone explain kind of the broader context for your organization, as a potential vendor, where you're investing that might be helpful for us in the future. But the main thing is it shows that we're important to you and you've taken the time. It's a really basic thing, but I met 1 or 2 customers that I've met, and I've met the CTO or the CFO, and they say, oh, I didn't think we'd meet you because you guys seem to have grown so much. I didn't think we were important anymore. and they just take reassurance from the fact that actually it doesn't need to be the CFO. You know, someone senior is turning up, and that in itself is just a demonstration that this customer is important to them.
Yeah, do you know what? It's a good reminder, because we are dealing with people. Our customers are people, and they do want to feel that we've taken the time to focus on them, and they are important, and that our organization takes them seriously, not just the seller. So yeah, it's a good piece of advice for people. Given the week we're in, given what's going on in the news, be great to get your view. I mean, I know it's early, but your view on the budget and what that might mean for sellers and in our industry. Any sort of takes that you could share with our team on the line?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, I would say, you know, the new government spent its first 3 months setting our expectations for something, you know, something really tough and terrible, and probably delivered something that that wasn't quite as bad certainly from a consumer and, you know, from a personal perspective for most people than we might have expected. So they really tried to set the expectations low. But from a business perspective, probably the most obvious thing is the increases in national insurance payments, and I think that is, you know, there is going to be a knock-on impact from that, because, you know, essentially it just immediately dents the profitability of businesses, and it's quite a significant cost for a lot of businesses. Again, particularly if you're selling into businesses where a lot of their spend is their people, then you know, then it's going to have quite an impact. So in our business, around 2/3 of our spend is people. So when you increase national insurance costs, you know, that kind of flows through to quite a big impact, and it does make us think again. So I think there's probably nothing different, I would say, as sellers immediately that you could do off the back of that, other than be aware there's likely to be a heightened sense of, oh, we're all doing our budgets for next year, and we've just had to take account of a £1 million hit or whatever because of the national insurance changes. So, you know, that's going to make us think harder. I think the other thing I would say, it's an example of, you know, I've had a couple of meetings about the budget and its impacts this week, and then I've gone into another meeting, one actually with a vendor, and it is, you know, that context switching is something that for all of the C-suite, including CFOs, you know, when you do get in our diary and you come into that room, and it might be a big sale for you and it's the most important thing of the week, but I might have just come from a meeting where my finance team's told me the budget's going to cost us £1 million, and I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, or I've just come from a meeting about pensions or about information security, or, you know, any number of things. So thinking about that and how you start off a meeting, understanding that while this is something you've been building up to, it might be something that your audience, in terms of me as part of that, has had maybe a 10-minute briefing last week on this, and 15 other meetings in between on totally different topics. So it's always worth just thinking about how that might impact the start of a meeting, if nothing else.
And that's a really good piece of advice, actually. Again, something we talk about in our training is using a very high-level summary in broad business terms about what it is your solution is, because you can't assume everyone you meet on that journey will have the same briefing and the same understanding, and as you've also said, the same focus, because there's other stuff going on in their diaries. Yeah, it's a good reminder that we get wrapped up in our ideas and our solution, and we're very excited by it, but actually the person who's receiving that information may have a lot else going on. I had another question come in, but much more in the technology side, which is around AI, in terms of where you see that going, in terms of what, you know, what excites you, or what makes you nervous or challenges about the AI and the role that could have within a whole finance department, but also from a CFO role.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I saw we had a discussion about this, you know, internally during the week, and someone showed a quote. I can't remember who it was from, but it basically said, you know, with these types of changes, we tend to overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term. And I think that does feel relevant to how it's been, not just for our business, but more broadly over the last year or two. So we've all gotten very excited, and everyone's trying to build AI into their products, particularly if they're software companies, and also, you know, then trying to use AI to change how they run their business. But I think so far for most businesses, the actual impact has been relatively limited. But I do think moving forward, certainly some of the tools that we're starting to use, from our vendors in terms of how we run our business, they've certainly got the potential to impact quite a number of roles, including the CFO role, in terms of sort of automating a lot, helping us get to decisions faster and get to better decisions faster. And that's one of the things I'm really excited about as a CFO, because one of the core things I want my finance team to be doing is help the business make good decisions. But also it is a concern, for people in their jobs that actually they might need to fundamentally change how they go about their day to day. But for us as a software vendor, we're looking at a number of our products where we're building AI in or building machine learning in to improve those products. But I guess, as I said before, it's still quite at the front end of really making that work to deliver value for our customers. So I would probably say right now, if you're a seller, I would say don't oversell the short-term benefit too much, because probably no one will believe you that it's going to revolutionize everything overnight. But I certainly believe in the impact over the kind of mid to long term.
Yeah, it feels a bit like the various technological revolutions we've had, where the timeline of the impact is oversold, but when it actually does happen, the impact will be much greater than any of us can imagine or even foresee right now. I think back to some of the things that at my age, and you're probably a little bit younger, Steve, but at our age, things like we've seen a massive change just with things like mobile phones and having internet in our pockets. And I think AI is going to do another shift, but the timeline may well be not what we're expecting or we're thinking about.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not any younger, but yeah, I think a book I read recently, one of the sort of sentiments in there was for young people today, the biggest skill that they can be taught is the ability to just change and sort of reinvent themselves, because much more so than I've needed to maybe in my career, or certainly our parents needed to, it's every 10 years or even shorter than that, what people are doing is going to be fundamentally different, with the pace of change has accelerated, and that ability to go with that is probably going to be a differentiator for people going forward.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think the whole ability to adapt, be flexible, curious, understanding what's changing and not be frightened, try not to be frightened by it, because the world is changing a lot. We're almost at time, Steve. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that I'm going to come off and think I wished I'd asked you? Maybe just a final thing about kind of what tips to sellers for building that cold email. What sort of things are you expecting to see, or would you respond to?
I think for a cold approach, it's try and show at least a little bit of effort to understand the basics of what my business is about, and the bare minimum of don't make it feel like don't let me look at that email in 1 second and realize it's a template that's the same template that's gone to 1,000 other people. I mean that's probably the entry level thing. Other than that, I do think with kind of cold approaches, a lot of it is about timing. If I happen to be thinking about what we're doing with our US dollars and Australian dollars and what we're doing with our foreign currency, when your email drops about helping people optimize their cash holdings across different currencies, then maybe I'll forward that on to someone in my team. I'm probably not likely to respond straight away, but the timing and a little bit of effort, if I was boiling it down to two things.
Oh, thank you, Steve. The effort is important, because we all get those clearly automated emails, and none of us like to receive them. But you've covered a whole lot of ground between kind of the role of a CFO, how that look from sort of the financial side through to the strategy and growing a business. Some great tips for sellers. So really appreciate and thank you for taking the time with us this morning. Just a reminder to everybody that the next webinar will be on the 22nd of November at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. and we'll be interviewing Jason Andrew, the CRO from Trellix, so another one in our persona series. Thank you so much for your time, Steve. I really appreciate it, and appreciate your openness to share all the thoughts with our community. Thank you.
No problem. Good to talk to you, Jan, and everybody. See you soon.